This is John Abrams, and this is the Variety Artist, episode 39. I get to interview lots of amazingly successful entertainers on this show. Every one of them is an expert in their own field, but every once in a while, I get to interview someone that knows his or her industry so well that it even shocks me. This is one of those times. So much great info. Oh, and by the way, if you enjoyed this interview, which I know you will, make sure to subscribe on your phone or mobile device or go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe there.
Welcome to The Variety Artist, providing aspiring artists and entertainers with in-depth discussions from top performers from all over the world. So get ready to book some gigs, make some money, and have some fun with your host, John Abrams.
He's performed for presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, and a host of celebrities. He's an award-winning master magician, hilarious stand-up comic, and world-class entertainer. In the past 30 years, comedy and magic have literally taken him to all 7 continents, performing over 130 countries for millions of delighted audience members. Variety artist, I give you Craig Diamond.
Ta-da!
How you doing, Craig?
Hey, I'm doing great, John. It's a real pleasure to join you today.
Well, I'm glad you could fit me in between your cruises.
Hey, that's all right. That's good. I'm glad to fit anything in between those.
Now, you sent me an email saying that you've been doing it for 30 years, being on cruise ships?
Yeah, I'll tell you, actually even longer. I started tail end of 1983 is when I started. First ship contract as a 9-month contract. I had 2 weeks off of that. From that, went into a 2-year contract of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And then from that point on, little did I know when I first started this, because I was doing review shows. I had started doing review shows with the Americana hotel chain.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing just clicked out of nowhere. Didn't know it was going to be a 30 plus year thing of 30 to 40 weeks a year and all of that. So, yeah.
So if someone would have put in front of you 30-year contract, what would you have said?
No concept of that. First of all, they say 30-year contract. Where do I sign? That's one. Okay, that's the first deal. No concept of the industry at that point and what it was going to grow and expand into. The quality that's involved with it, the high standards that's involved with it, the work that goes into it. And when you travel extensively that way, what you learn, it's an entire education that you get nowhere else in the world other than hands-on.
I would think so. In fact, we're going to talk a lot about cruise ships. But before your cruise ship a career, you were doing reviews. What were you doing before your cruise ship career?
I was doing a pretty heavy type of show by the time I was 10.
Oh.
As far as a structured 30 to 45 minute show. At 10, I actually had that put together.
I think I had that put together when I was 30.
Really? Okay. I actually had small hands, and I was told sleight of hand was not going to be my forte. And of course, you tell a kid what not to do, and the first thing they do. I'll back up a little bit, okay? I'll tell you how it all started.
Yeah, go.
I came out of the era where at about 5, I saw the old Houdini movie with Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh.
Oh, yeah.
That did it, okay? That I changed it from age 5. I went from wanting to be a cowboy to a magician.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, and of course, historically, we know eventually it's all Hollywood and all that, but that lit my fire. Mm-hmm. Sneaky Pete Magic Kit. Now, there will be some people listening to this that may be old enough to remember that brand name. I would love to have one leftover from that magic kit, and I'm sorry to say I don't, but a Sneaky Pete Magic Kit followed.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on a poultry farm in central Pennsylvania, so not around show business, absolutely nothing like that.
Yeah.
But the summer that I was 7, the family bought a campground that joined our farm property, and I would go campsite to campsite with my little magic set doing magic tricks. And one day this gentleman came up to me and took the top of a ketchup bottle off, did a French drop, where I'd never seen anything like that. My eyeballs fell out of my head.
Yeah.
As I understand you like magic, find out that he and his wife were one of our permanent campers. They were there every weekend. And the following week, when they arrived Friday night, I was waiting for them with with my little box of tricks. Mm-hmm. And that summer was spent sitting around campfires Friday and Saturday nights of listening to these great stories. He was an old vaudeville magician.
Oh.
His name was James T. Warmkessel. He was one of the first magicians on television. There was a children's television program filmed live out of Philadelphia in the late 40s and early 50s called The Sally Star Show. Mm-hmm. He was the magician that appeared regularly on that. Taking me under my wing, listening to these great showbiz stories. He'd go into his camper, make up a trick, come out, perform it for me, teach it to me. Got me a little mail order magic catalog, Douglas Magic Land from Texas, and marked little things of what I could do at that age. And by the time of that summer was up, he had helped me put together a professional show at that age. So by the time I was 8, I started doing birthday parties and Lions clubs and that type of thing.
Wow.
And it all started from that. Then that morphed into being invited to join Ring 20, which is the Harrisburg IBM ring.
Okay.
They had to vote to get me in early because I was way, way underage for what you could actually join the IBM at that point. Mm-hmm. But I was doing more shows than just about anybody in the club. At that point, regardless of age.
Like, who's this little kid showing us all up?
That's it. And I don't know if they still do it, but back then you had to do a trick too. And then I left the room and they had to vote whether I was going to be, and I did Jeffrey Buckingham's 13 billiard ball routine. And that was at age 9.
Dang.
I did that. Now they were small billiard balls, all right? They were the small little red enamel jobbies.
Yeah.
Of course, that got me in. Then coming from that area in the Northeast, one of the main magic conventions is the Magicians Alliance of Eastern States conventions. Through the early to mid 70s, very active in that as a teenager, both in competing and then performing in the evening shows as well, winning a variety of the awards that came out of that. I met Mark D'Souza in 74 at the SAM convention in Boston, one of the greatest conventions of all time, mm-hmm. and started to make my friends with the ones that we were competing. We were coming out of that era, rubbing elbows with Paul Gertner was competing then, John Stetson, Mike Amar.
So they were young competing at that time?
Yeah. Mark was just a little ahead of me because I was still in the junior category in my very first competition, and Mark was teenage. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, every year we got a little older, so those things started to change category-wise. Yeah, so those were the guys I would hang around with in the early years. So I was involved with that, and then I changed to a stage name. Diamond is not my legal name. I changed to Diamond under the advice of the same gentleman that was involved with giving advice to Penn and Teller, and we called him Rosie. He was a professor with Teller. We spent a weekend with Rosie, and while I didn't use a lot of the stuff that he had sent my way, what I did use professionally aided and promoted and helped, and one of the things was using a name that people will remember.
Yeah.
We had a few different names that were thrown around. At that particular time, there was a competition act that I was designing for FISM, where everything was covered in Austrian crystal stones and it looked like diamonds.
Nice.
He came up with the idea of Diamond, and then also that any assistant, unless you're married to your assistant, like just about every magic act that you go through, you have to work with an assistant. It's going to generally be, if it's not your wife, that name can change from time to time, okay, as you go through assistants. So Rosie had suggested we use as a stage name Craig Diamond and Crystal.
Okay.
It fit the look with the props that were being made, and it clicked, and it really did. That was really the beginning. A lot of things clicked during that time.
Is Crystal your wife?
Well, no. By the time my wife joined the show.
Am I going to get you in trouble?
No. Just there were already too many crystals. Okay. So, and I totally agree with that. She didn't want to be another crystal, so that's all right. So when my wife joined the show, then we booked for 20 years as the Diamonds.
Oh.
Craig and Diamond and Crystal to just simply as the Diamond. So for probably 2/3 of the cruise career for me, it was the Diamonds. That's how we were known. And I met my wife on a cruise ship. This is a great story.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of funny because at that point I had 2 or 3 different dancers that had worked with me in the show, assistants and dancers that would work with me for periods of time. I was entertaining on a Holland America ship. This would have been in 1985, and I went walking through the casino and saw this gorgeous, stunning, blonde blackjack dealer.
Mm.
I always say it was love at first sight because I knew she'd be able to fit in all the boxes.
He's wondering why you're sizing her up. You're like,
and we all know, those of us that are the box jumper acts, we all know there's a lot of truth to that. All
That's
right.
right.
So at any rate, but that was the beginning, and she was a natural. She was a professional croupier for years both in England and then out on the ships. Had some dance training in her youth and everything. So it was a perfect fit. It was perfect for us to join forces in both in the act and in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We've had 31 years of marriage now, so it's worked. All right. So now here is another thing. Now you're working with your assistant's your wife.
Yep.
You're traveling 32 to 42 weeks a year.
Okay.
You're working in whether it's cruise ships or reviews. All right, but let's in particular cruise ships, confined environment. All right.
Yeah.
Working and living with each other 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, wonderful, 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 wonderful. But I do see it in other people's cases and other acts over the years, and a lot don't last because of the intensity, the fact that you're around somebody 24/7. Most people have jobs that are husbands and wives. One of them goes away for the day, or they both go away for the day, then they do their own thing. They get back at the end of the day, whatever, but 24/7 and traveling together. The stress of traveling, the stress of showbiz, it tends to take its toll on a lot of the couple acts that are out there. We were blessed. We handled it. We put up with each other. All right. So I make the joke. I say, when you live and work together 24/7, it's like being married in dog years. So that's.
Well, since we're talking about your wife, one of the videos I watched, you talked about consummating your marriage. I can cut this out if you want.
Oh my God! Yeah, no. It's a joke. It's a great joke we do on the ship. I say we on a ship consummating our marriage, and just as we were about to reach the magical moment, huge wave hit the ship and knocked my wife clear across the cabin. And I got up and said, "Now don't be expecting that every time, now, honey."
That's great.
Now that works for the ship, and those that laugh get it. Those that don't, I don't explain it.
Move on to whatever's next.
That's it. Sometimes, hey, you know what it's like. It's amazing. You go out, show after show, night after night, or week after week. You do periods of time. I reformat my show on a regular basis to keep things fresh. But for a season or for 2 seasons, the shows don't change. The audience changes every week. And it's just amazing. And people will ask me, what's the answer when you go out and you do a line or a piece of material that is always through the roof, never fails, and you go out and you do that same thing, absolutely nothing different other than it's a different audience, and for some reason, either that joke doesn't go through the roof, it bounces off the back wall on crickets.
Yep.
The effect of magic that is normally gasping or applause or standing ovation, they're staring at you instead. And you think, what on earth is the difference? And there is a vibe, I think, in the different. And in particular, when you in the cruise market, when it's week in, week out, when the product itself isn't changing, the variable is your audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what a difference from one week to the next. In this business, in the cruise industry, you know long before you do your show if that's going to be the case, because that vibe is there from the get-go. And those that are experienced with that and involved with the feeling and observing the demographic that's on, what you're in for.
So you figure out the crowd even before they come in?
I try to. I walk around on embarkation day and I'm watching, are they happy? Are they engaging with each other? Are they talking to each other in the elevator? Mm-hmm. Because it's the masses coming together from all over, everywhere, not only the United States, but literally all over the world.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I developed stand-up comedy right around 1999, 2000. I started putting together an entirely separate show just for stand-up. Mm-hmm. So I go out equally as many times as a stand-up now as I do for the magic. Now, my wife and I have retired the Big Illusion show nearly 10 years ago. So from that point on, I became what they call a fly-in act, and a comedy magic fly-in. So I'm either doing the comedy magic or the stand-up.
Explain a fly-in act.
Fly-in act is where you're not traveling with a lot of equipment. I'll give you an example. The illusion acts, we were shipping anywhere from 19 to 27 cases of freight.
Oh.
Worldwide, sometimes in very short periods of time. The learning curve of how to do that and the mistakes that happen in the early years or the early times of doing that, where you think you have enough time to get things from A to B, you don't realize you've got to be hiring the logistic companies, you don't realize the customs, the brokers that are involved, the port agents that happen to be involved to be doing the transfers, just all those things.
Yeah.
You fly into somewhere I fly into San Juan, and the equipment should be there and the equipment's not there. Well, the ship isn't waiting. You're sailing without it or not. To coordinate and organize all that is very difficult. Generally, when you're shipping that type of equipment, you do almost residencies on the particular ship with the company that's hiring you. So say it's Holland America, they'll put you on the Volendam or the Zaandam or whatever, the Volendam or the Zuiderdam or one of the damn ships. And you might be there for 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. It might be basically a long run, whether it could be 12 months. It just varies. Now, you're able to take a break here and there throughout that time frame, but everything stays on the ship. You might take a week or two just to go home and have a break. So that's basically a residency show on the ship, and they do that because of the expense of getting the equipment from A to B.
Sure.
I disembarked a world cruise in Rio de Janeiro, offloaded 18 cases, large cases of freight to the port agent, joined a ship 10 days later in San Diego, and all the equipment was supposed to be there. Nothing was.
Oh.
And it wasn't there for 3 more weeks, simply because Brazil would not allow customs in Brazil to release the equipment because the logistics company was not a Brazilian company. That makes no sense, basically. Yeah. So they more or less held our equipment for ransom for the company to basically pay quite a bit more to finally get it released. I'm 3 weeks into engagement with no equipment till everything finally arrives.
So what are you doing?
In that particular time, I just rode. I mean, we rode. We just cruised and ordered room service and got paid for the gig because it was their fault. That's not too bad. Here's the difference now with a fly-in act. The fly-in act is an act that you're checking 1, 2, 3, 4 suitcases that are within size and dimensions or as close as possible. So it's cheaper for the cruise lines, and you're mobile. Basically, they can fly you in for a week or two, in and out, and they can literally be flying you all over the world. You might do 2 weeks in South America, get off that, fly home. You're home for 3 days. Then they're flying you up to Montreal. You're picking up a ship. You're doing Montreal to Boston. You get off there. Next thing you know, you're doing a run from Lauderdale to Lisbon. You finish Lisbon. You jump from Lisbon over to something in Venice, pick up a ship there. It's that type of thing because you have the mobility.
Right.
You can't do that with the large cases because you simply can't check them on the airplanes with you.
And it's expensive too. It's expensive to ship all of that stuff.
Very expensive. Most of the companies subcontract their own logistics company. You set everything up with them. But I'll tell you, this is learning experience for anybody and any magician, any illusionist doing this for the first time. No matter what they say, they're going to handle for you. You have to double and triple check constantly, whether it's phone calls to the port agent on the receiving end, whether it's making sure it's contents and dimensions. And if you don't do it, the stuff's just not going to be there.
Right.
So I don't miss those years. So as a fly-in act, you tend to be able to have more mobility, but it's also a little more wear and tear, I would say also.
And do you have to work your way up to being a fly-in act?
No, it just depends. You can start off that way. I tend to think right now, to be honest with you, magic-wise, they tend to look more for the fly-ins as much as anything. You've got more variations. You got more mobility. You've got it just helps them. That seems to be more of the norm now. Now there are some of the giant ships, and we are in an age now of mega ships. I started working on ships that were just about the size of the Titanic when I
Wow.
came into the business. Now, we think that's big, okay? But the Titanic was not that big of a ship.
Is that right?
Not by today's standards, not at all. Okay. You're talking about a 41,000 ton ship compared to 250, 300,000 ton ships today. All right.
Wow.
So yeah, it's hard to fathom because you think of the Titanic. So yeah, my first couple years, the average ships were about 38 to 40,000 tonners for the first couple years. So historically, when you start seeing the size, you think, oh my goodness. And the showrooms have changed drastically. They went from ballroom type showrooms to full scale theatrical rooms that rival anything you can see on any world class stage anywhere in the world.
Oh.
Just amazing. Now, that being said, I prefer an intimate room over a 3,000 person showroom any day.
You and me both. So are you doing different shows for the different size rooms?
My longevity in the cruise industry is simply because I have changed. I have refocused all kinds of material. You cannot work a showroom that's 3,500 people the same way you're going to work a showroom for 600 people.
Sure.
The other thing, the rooms that are the smaller rooms tend to be a more elite deluxe cruise demographic as far as the clientele. All right. The mega ships are more affordable because it's a mega ship.
Right. Is it more family friendly?
There's a half dozen lines that I actually prefer to work. I really like the smaller ones, but you can't do the same show that you're doing on. But first of all, they don't want big ship comedy or humor. It's a much more sophisticated crowd. You've got to be aware of that. You've got to be aware that maybe you've just worked Carnival the week before. You can't take that act that you've done on Carnival and transfer it to a company like Regent, which is a very upscale, ultra deluxe, and what comes with that. It's just not going to work. And you're going to have acts that do that don't know better. And of course, that's the end of them ever coming back to that particular spot. And not just act, demeanor. You're not only judged on what you're doing on stage, they want that to be top notch, but they also want your demeanor off stage, because the cruise industry is unlike any other form of show business. Because the day after you perform your show, you are living with your audience for X amount of days. So whether you are going for breakfast, lunch, dinner, whether you're simply laying out by the pool, whatever, you're one of their stars. So the people are coming up to you and maybe saying very nice things to you, maybe saying really stupid things to you, maybe wanting pictures, maybe wanting autographs, maybe not knowing what to say. They just want to approach you and say some of the weirdest, strangest things you can imagine. And
yeah, because they don't know any better.
That's it.
They're just trying to make an impression on you.
They don't know what to do. I'll give you an example. I'm helping an act off. It's my show night that particular night, and I'm helping one of the entertainers that's leaving that day, disembarking. His show was the night before. He's a world-class musical showman from the UK, and I'm helping him into the elevators just so he can get his bags in, and he's headed down to the tender. We're in a Mexican port getting on. A lady gets off. She looks at me, and she says, "Was that the performer last night?" I said, "Yes. Wasn't he great?" And she says, "No."
Oh.
She said, "He played too loud." Well, that's not him. Okay. First of all, that's not an issue with him. That's a sound thing. And not only that, he didn't play too loud. Okay. But in this particular age group. And she says, "But I have one question for you." And I said, "Yes." She says, "What size shoes does he wear?" "He has the biggest feet I've ever seen." Now, how do you get a question like that?
How do you respond to that?
And I just looked at her. I said, "I have no idea." And then she looked at me and she says, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I happen to be your entertainer performing tonight." And of course, my picture's up all over the ship on all the electronic boards. I'm in the program from the night before, so it's not subtle. But what do you do? And I said, "Well, I'm your entertainer tonight." "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I do comedy and magic." And she says, "Well, I hate magic, and I certainly don't like to laugh."
Oh.
And I said to her, well, then you get the night off.
Yeah.
And,
Unless you're interested in coming and watching my feet.
no, and walked away, just walked away because that's no win. You can't engage. God bless her. Obviously not, not my, but it's like, where the heck does that come from?
I don't know.
You're in this enclosed environment. This is the weird thing about cruise work. And this is what some acts can't handle. The stage time is great, but it's such a small amount of the actual time.
Yeah.
You're working one night, maybe a second night if you're part of a variety show. The rest of the time, you've got to maintain your sanity and not go off on some of these type of stupid things that people will say.
Sure. So do you plan on what you're going to wear according to what type of ship you're on?
Yes.
And I'm not talking about performance-wise. I'm talking about when you're not performing.
Totally. Oh my goodness, yes. Absolutely, totally. When you're on the higher end, there are some of those that it's a lot of formal nights, and even nights that aren't formal are still jacket and tie nights.
Mm-hmm.
And now, the interesting phenomenon, Anna, with the industry is, however, the things are changing with the airlines and regulations, how much you can check, what your weight is and everything. There are a variety of the ultra deluxe upscale lines that have eliminated the formal nights and just designate what they call a country club casual environment. Might be men wearing sports jackets and everything in the evening, but as much as anything, it isn't. It's just, well dressed, but casual, well dressed. So that is becoming more and more and more the norm. I like getting dressed. I was one of those guys that always dressed for stage. I'm a guy that wears diamond shoes on stage. I believe that your look is very important on stage. I'm old school that way.
Yeah, well, and your last name is Diamond.
Well, it goes. I try to put those things together that way, so it does. But then on my off time, I want to stand out. I want to be the one, and especially after I've performed, if I'm out in public, I'm old school in the sense that I think an entertainer should stand out.
Yeah.
And not only in dress, but then also in demeanor. All right. I think you should be polite to your people. There are some entertainers that do not want to be bothered. They feel that their private time, and I don't mean ultra famous people that they can. I mean just an everyday Joe, what I want to call the likes of myself, that's just a working man's performer. They still don't handle the public well. And they're the ones that usually don't get rehired over an extended period of time.
Yeah, I'm sure the cruise director or whoever's in charge of that hears about that from their passengers.
Of course you do. Well, I'll tell you what, I get disparaged. Over the years, I've heard Simon Cowell mention, I don't know how many times, derogatory comments about a cruise ship entertainer, or you're not good enough for a cruise ship, or you're not even this, or you're not even that.
Yeah.
Mind you, I could list a name of A-list celebrities that you can't even imagine that I've worked with on ships. From Bill Cosby, Tony Bennett, David Brenner, George Burns, Victor Borga. The list goes on and on. Now, yes, it's a bit of a different era age-wise, okay? But these were and to their end of the day, were A-list performers.
Yeah.
And okay, even if you're not that, the next tier of performers, most acts, if they have a decent promo video, can get a gig on a ship. One time. You'll get an agent to represent you. They send your material to the buyer. They see a 6-minute promo video. If it's been edited and does well, that's great. But then you've got to deliver when you get to that engagement. You've got to deliver with a very strong, all A-list 45-minute show. Plus, you've got to deliver. You then need to have a second 15 to 20-minute show for a variety show. Oh. Some lines want you to have a second full 45-minute show. And it can't be one show's your A show, one show's your B show. They have to both be A shows.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you want to continue to work. They have a very high rating, and everybody can get a chance to get on once or twice or whatever, but you're not coming back. Okay, your ratings get low, and for whatever reason, you get a bad evaluation. Now, that being said, a great act can also get on, and you can have someone that butts heads for whatever reason or is jealous, and a great act gets a bad evaluation, and they're also gone.
Who's evaluating? Is it the cruise director or is it the audience?
Everybody. When I first started with Holland America in the early 80s, every passenger was given a rating form, and you were listed individually with your name, and you were rated 1 to 9. And regardless of the length of your contract, week in, week out, you had to maintain an 8.34 average.
Wow.
Out of 9. Name another business.
Yeah. I'm doing accounting. Let's see.
Yeah, figure what that is. I'm not sure what that works out to be, okay? But it's crazy, okay?
It's high.
It is high. The other thing that why I when someone says, well, you're not even good enough for this, for the ships or that, a ship, unlike almost any other venue audience-wise, you are playing to the coastal elites, whether it's West Coast or East Coast, both. You're playing to Bible Belt, Middle America. You're playing to North and South, and you're playing to sometimes large percentages of different groups of different international nationalities.
Different cultures.
Totally. It could be Spanish, German, Brits, Canadians, Australian. Now, and just because they speak English does not mean it's going to be the same, that your comedy and there's no language barrier does not mean that's, and I'll give you an example of that. For years, we spent years being an act on the Queen Elizabeth II. Mm-hmm. And in her day, she was probably the most famous liner of her time. In the summertime, she would do runs New York City to Southampton, 6-day crossings, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, all summer. So many times the New York to England was a heavy U.S. crowd traveling to Europe instead of flying. From England to New York, you had a higher percentage of Brits or people from the UK or Europeans traveling. They needed acts that you would call crossover acts, because an American comic, a well-known American comic that could be someone we see on TV every night, would die a death with the English crowd. Well, so it's the same thing with magic. It can be the same way. If you're not presenting in some way and crossing over to that demographic, you're not. So there's an example how a cruise is unlike any other type of. Now, I'll give you a story here.
Yeah, go.
Two summers ago, and I'm just doing stand-up for 4 weeks on a run out of Vancouver, 7-day Alaska run. And I'm working opening night, introduction night, which is an icebreaker night, which I like. I like icebreaker night. Just as I'm getting ready to go on, the stage manager is laughing, and it's a stage manager I've known for years, and he's laughing. He's got a clipboard in front of him, and this is 3 minutes before I'm being introduced to go on stage. And it's the breakdown. Now, I think that particular ship, I think we were an 1,800 passenger ship on that ship. Okay. We had nearly 900 mainland Chinese passengers, non-English speaking mainland Chinese passengers. Then we had, then it was 200 Germans, 100 Dutch, 100 Aussies, another 200 of Canadians, and 60 Americans. I mean, that was like the breakdown.
60.
And I'm doing stand-up.
Yeah.
And and at first I'm thinking, why don't they have me doing magic visual stuff? But at any rate, so I go out for 15 minutes and try to make. Now this is where the magic background comes in. So whether you're doing a pantomime, whether you're doing facial features, I happen to have the human xylophone effect.
What is that?
It's not a magic piece, but it's commercially available. You get 8 people out of the stage. They get 8 sections of wind chimes, and you give them wooden spoons, and you direct them to play. You turn them into a human xylophone.
Okay.
And they play, if it's holiday time, it's Jingle Bells. If there's always somebody having a birthday, it's birthday. And it's all ad lib. There's almost no set routine with it. You work off the person. You have to have that ability to, when someone gives you something, that you run with it. So I throw that into the comedy show. So I cross over. That's an example of how, as a comedian, I can cross over even to an audience that isn't even understanding what I'm saying.
Sure.
You learn that or you don't learn it. And if you learn it, you work a lot.
That's a great idea. I've had a number of people on this show that have silent acts or acts that are just with music and such. And so they do it for any culture or any cruise ship.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas you are comedy and magic.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have in your pocket something that you can do that's very visual or audio, right?
Now, an example, multiplying bottles.
Yep.
On a personal level, not one of my favorite effects. On a commercial level and response from the crowd, I can't believe what it gets, what it is. Okay. And there's an example of a visual comedic piece that's a visual crossover that you can get what you want out of it. You can make it longer if you're dealing with an English speaking crowd. You can feign whether you're drinking while you're doing it and getting to whatever. It's comedic, yeah. It's visual, and it can be comedic to so yes, you can be select. The banana bandana, everybody and their brother does it. It's the easiest thing to travel with.
Yeah.
I'm not one to fault performing any commercial piece as long as you throw your own thing to it.
Yep.
I don't like seeing performers just you get it out of the pack, you do the patter that's written. That's nothing to me. Okay. And I don't like seeing add your own individuality to anything and you'll make it a success in your own way.
Yeah.
And by the way, John, you had said about who evaluates you on these things.
Oh, okay? Yeah.
And yes, your audience rates you and fills in comments. I think that's a Frankenstein monster today with social media. Everybody has so much more of a power of a voice, and it has tended to get kind of nasty.
Yep.
And I always thought once this started happening with social media that the comment card thing on the ship would kind of maybe be put away because, well,
Sure.
It hasn't. They're still doing it. And along with being evaluated by your audience, you are evaluated by a cruise director. You're evaluated many times by the hotel manager as well. You're evaluated by your stage manager.
Oh.
And if you use live music, if you showed up and your charts weren't right or weren't good, you were also evaluated by the music director on board.
What kind of music do they have now? One of my questions was about the orchestra, because I've seen some of your videos, and the orchestra has a huge, gigantic flavor.
I love that, John. I'm old school with that. I came out of that. Now, some magicians want a background behind them that is not distracting, depending on what they're performing. I come from an era where give me a live band behind me or an orchestra behind me any day.
Oh, yeah.
It looks big. It makes the entire show feel different.
Yep.
I mean, I have musicians that I've known literally for 30 years that pop up from one gig to the next. It's almost a Rat Packy type thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Along with working the audience, you can turn back to the band. And I always, anytime I'm working with an orchestra or a band, there's always two things in my show that I have not done before. And I make sure it's primarily thrown at the band. Now, I'm not doing that to work to the band because that's death. You never work to only the band. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to be connected to the band and the audience.
Absolutely. But if you can have some fun back and forth, and I'll give you, hey, here's an example.
Sure.
I got a guy up. This is probably 30 years ago, 28 years ago. I have a guy up for the sub trunk.
Yeah.
Get a guy out of the audience. I've got him in the trunk and he will not get out of the trunk. Won't get out of the trunk.
Okay.
And I do 5 minutes of every bit of shtick I can think of to get laughs to get this guy out of the trunk. 5 minutes is a long time. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. I've done everything and I've kept the momentum going, but I'm about to hit empty and don't know what to do. And this guy is just not moving. So I looked into the orchestra and I just said, okay, guys. And I just kind of motioned my head. And they all put down their instruments and they all got up and came forward and physically grabbed this guy at one part of his body or another and physically lifted him out of the trunk.
Oh, that's great. If you could only reenact that.
Oh my God. I didn't even say, guys, come do this. They were sick of them too. They wanted to, okay, let's get this thing over with. It looks so great, but sadly, the lines have cut back. My gosh, when I first started, you'd have 12-piece orchestras out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had to have charts written for that. Very expensive. So, every piece of magic that you're doing, if there's music involved, you're having charts written for them.
And now what are they doing?
Tracks.
Just tracks.
Yeah, tracks.
So you bring in your tracks from your iPhone.
Yeah.
And you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Now, again, because I had everything orchestrated, I just have my orchestrations recorded. So I still have all my drum rolls, all my chords, all my, it's like I'm working with a live band. I just have a sound guy controlling it now
Nice.
instead of a band.
After 30 years, you've probably seen just about everything.
All right, I have a Bill and Lemon routine that I've done for years and years and years. And in the course of it, I have the person that brings the money up, puts on it looks like a helmet. I say it's a safety device. If you're non-union, you have to, if there's fire on stage, you have to. So, and there's a facial mask attached to it, and it's very funny.
Okay.
And it allows me to do something on stage that he can't see. There's a reason why he's got the mask on too. All right. So at a certain point when I need to, it's time for the mask to come off. And guy takes the mask off, and I'm looking at the audience, and the audience just bursts into hysterical laughter. And I hear the guy say, "Oh, great, it all came off." And I turn around, and he's reaching into this mask to pull out his hair because his hairpiece came off.
Oh, no.
And of course, there's no mirror on stage, so he puts his hairpiece on backwards.
Oh, no.
You can't. You just have to stop and let this, and then I walked over and I actually readjusted his hairpiece for him, so that, this, and you know what? The first thing people say after the show, that was a setup, wasn't it?
Of course.
Anything that's so ridiculously funny, that was a setup. Now, another time, for years, I do an audience acupuncture now, but for years I traveled with a big 6-foot guillotine as to do a comedy guillotine. Now, in my opinion, the guillotine is just a comedy piece. No one believes you're chopping a head off. And
of course.
I don't think it's an overly fooling illusion of any kind. It's just done as a comedic relief. I often did it in the middle of a review show when they needed like 6 minutes of comedy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This was a land engagement for a rather important political affair because I had senators and representatives and congressmen sitting in the front row. And I get the lady up, she's down on the guillotine, and of course, doing the shtick leading up to it. And everybody knows if you're doing that, the usual fake 3 count, 1, 2, 3 days ago we had an accident, stock line. And I go 1, 2, 3 days ago we had an accident. And when I said 3 days ago, now she's on her knees with her head locked in the stocks. And when I said 3 days, she spits her dentures out of her mouth. And towards the front row, spits the dentures out. They flew out at such a high arc. She must have put backspin on them because when they landed, they bounced twice back to her. Oh. and they bounced back close enough she was able to reach around with her arm, grab them, and put them back in her teeth.
Oh, my gosh.
So, her mouth. So, well, that's that's basically you go sit on the edge of the stage and just wait till the pandemonium stopped. Because I looked out, I had a congressman and a senator off their seat on the floor, slapping the floor on that one. And the other one, another gem, because someone had written some questions about, what are some of the terrible things that happen on stage and
sure,
that type of thing. And this sort of borderlines. It's sort of funny, but it's what would you do? Bill and Lemon routine, my routine I have done with a few changes, but it's been almost the same routine since 1976. So it's a very formulated routine. So as I mentioned about this helmet/mask that I have them put on.
Okay.
At a certain point, I have a guy bring $100 bill. This is on a ship, 100, and it's a big showroom. I got about 1,500 people in the audience, and this guy looks like he's been beat up pretty good. When he hits the stage, and I get a good close-up look at him, he looks like he's been on the wrong side of a few bar brawls. He's got a baseball cap on and a flannel shirt. It is an Alaska cruise. Okay, so. Get him on stage, get through the routine, and I'm at the point for him to put the helmet on, and I say, you'll need to remove your hat. He reaches up to remove his cap, and when he does that, something falls onto the stage floor and bounces on his right side. I see something, and I'm looking, and I'm trying to think what I am looking at. And it's his prosthetic ear.
Oh,
when he went to take his cap off, he bumped his ear and he had a fake ear. So his ear has now he's got a hole on the side of his head and his ear is laying on the stage.
And his ear fell off.
His ear fell off. All right. So now Stage left can't see a thing, doesn't know what's going on. Stage right sees what has happened of the audience. Okay,
Yeah.
stage right of the audience, seeing what's happening in the audience. This isn't like, oh, I'm busting out and laughing. This guy's ear has now fallen off, and we're looking at a hole in his head. Okay,
God.
so I slip around, and he doesn't know his ear's laying on the stage.
Oh, he doesn't know his ears falling off?
No. He has no idea. And of course, I haven't put this helmet or mask on. I'm not going to do that at this point. But his ear's on the stage. So I go around him, and I bend down, and I pick the ear up. And I come over to him, and I kind of do the maitre d' glide, what I call it. You know, a little backhand with you know, when you're trying to slip a bill to a maitre d', I try.
Oh, yeah.
I try to do that subtle, even though I'm in front of 1,500 people.
You know that half the audience saw his ear fall off.
How subtle is putting an ear in somebody, you know? And he still does not know his ear's off. So I put this in his hand. Now, I'm wearing a lavalier mic, and I've not hit the mute. And I swear, I say to him, "Here's your ear." And he says loudly, "What?" Well, let me tell you, I couldn't keep it together. No, I couldn't. At that point, I bent over. The right stage right of the audience, they're just about peeing their pants. All right, they're screaming, and stage left doesn't have a clue what the hell is going on at this point. They just do not know. And he just calmly slips his ear back on the thing, and on we go. But maybe one of the weirdest things I've ever. Now it was so interesting. I had to follow up afterwards. After the show, I went down. I sent a bottle of. I sent drinks to the table because I didn't want him to be embarrassed in case or everything. And here, he was on Oprah and a couple other shows. He survived a grizzly attack.
Oh,
is well known for surviving this grizzly attack, and this is one of the. So when I say he looks like he was beat up in a bar, I mean the scars, the grizzly just about. The grizzly attacked his girlfriend, and he went at the grizzly with a Swiss Army knife.
Wow.
There's a great backstory of too. A guy's ear falls off stage, and then you find afterwards what this was all about too, which is rather interesting.
You do some strange things.
Oh my God. It just, now here on a ship, how do you handle something on stage? Opening night, I'm doing Bill and Lemon routine and cube zag for an opening spot. And I'm halfway through the Lemon routine. I'm acting like I've burned the guy's money. From the ringside area where this person came from, a woman's voice says, "We need a doctor." And I think it's her husband just being funny, acting like, I've just burned his $100 bill. They need a doctor. Uh-huh. And the voice says, "No, we need a doctor."
Uh-oh.
And at that point, I stepped off the stage, kind of went down, shielded my eyes so I could look. And we've got a man in convulsions on the dance floor at this point, ringside dance floor. So, of course, we had to stop the show, got a spoon in his mouth so he wouldn't swallow his tongue. Everything had to come to a complete stop. Now, the guy who's brought the money up is on stage. He thinks I've burned his $100 bill at this point. He's just sort of off the side of the stage waiting for all this to finish.
Because he's down $100.
He's got $100. All right. Now, this takes about 20 minutes till the medical team come in. They get a gurney in. They get and they get him out. On a ship, everything runs very tight to schedule. So Cube Zag is out for finishing. We got to wrap this up. Now, it's been all fun and laughs prior to this. Now, how do you get that back?
Yeah.
Wrap that up after they've wheeled somebody out in front of the whole audience. And the answer is you don't. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't, and you don't try. My solution was this, because they said they wanted me to wrap it up. So I went out on stage and I said, "Hey folks, our thoughts and prayers are with that gentleman." And I said, "And I know somebody else that is praying to get their $100 back. Drum roll, please." And bang, boom, cut, lip, there you go. No shtick, no nothing. There's your 100 and good night. Because to try to make jokes after that, forget it.
Yeah, there's your show.
That's it. Hey, John, I do want to mention, too, on all the ship work, because I am sort of semi-retiring from the bulk of that type of a schedule. And we've gotten involved to running a theater in Arkansas, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. In fact, yeah, we'll get off the cruise ship thing. What is the World of Illusion? That's what you're about to talk about, right?
Well, the world of illusion, I came up with this idea when I was a teenager. You know, when you were in school, and maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but a class would sell candy or candles or all kinds of crap to raise money for their class.
Yep.
At 12, 13, I'm performing in SAM and IBM ring and assembly shows, and many times the closing act, because I was doing illusions and birds and stuff like that. So when I went to the conventions, my first couple national conventions, and saw the evening shows, it just gave me an idea. So I approached the school administration. This was at age 14.
Mm-hmm.
Said, I could produce a show for you that in one night you'll make as much money as what you sell all this stuff all year for a fundraiser for a class. So they gave me a limited budget. I was able to bring in one national act. I brought the Gustuses in from Philadelphia. And at that time, in the 70s, Dick Gustafson had just been president of the Society of American Magicians, and their Magic by Candlelight was, and to this day remains, one of the classic acts of the industry. Brought them in and padded the show with other members of the local SAM and IBM organizations. It was such a success. They doubled my budget. The next year, I brought the Gustafsons back. I brought Del Rey in, brought Fedco in, a few more people. Third year, double my money again. Now I'm bringing in acts from all over. Fourth year in, I had Tommy Wander from Holland.
Oh, yeah.
It was a non-convention magic evening. At that time, one of the only non-magic related as far as sponsorship with an organization that had that type of talent.
Wait, are you 17 years old at that time?
Yeah, I just started at 14, and I did it every year till graduating, and then went back several years after that to continue doing it for the school as a fundraiser. 1975 at the SAM convention in Chicago, I'm having lunch with Dick Gustafson, because I'm talking about he's coming back for the second year, and we have Del Rey lined up at that point, and this young man comes up to Dick Gustafson to introduce himself, to say how much he enjoyed Dick and Joanne's work, and I'm so impressed with the act, and it meant so much. And it was Copperfield. He was in Chicago for the show, his show, The Magic Man, that ran in the early part of his career. So yes, getting to hobnob, these guys just took me under their wings, and they were so happy to do the show with me. They were impressed that this was a high school fundraiser and that I was able to pull this off. That went from 1 year to the next. Finally, then the career kept that I had to travel and didn't do it. So 2 years ago, I was recovering from a minor operation. A dear friend of mine who took magic lessons from me when he was a kid, I've been his mentor his whole life. When I retired, the big illusion show, he and his wife took on almost all the big stuff that we did. He has grown in his own right to be just a top flight performer, both in personality, creativeness, and presentation.
What is his name, if you don't mind me asking?
This is John Westford.
Okay.
John and Susan Westford. They're primarily corporate and casino. He does some Vegas work, some of the Indian casinos. He looks to do the show on theaters. I had worked with this theater in Arkansas initially about 5 years ago, and the owners had a health crisis and had to shut down. So I called to see if the theater was still in business, if it was open, what we could be done to work with it. It had been shut down, and we've raised this thing from the ashes. We've resurrected the world of illusion, because between John and myself, we're covering all genres of magic. From grand illusion to close-up to comedy to manipulation. It's all in the show.
Cool.
Putting it in our theater, we are marketing to the bus tour industry. For the past 2 years, we are marketing in bus tour conferences and conventions in that region.
Are you talking about the Arkansas region, or are you talking about the Savannah Theater in Georgia?
The difference is the Savannah Theater is the oldest theater in America. It's 200 years this year. It's listed as America's oldest theater. So it's one of the most historic theaters in the country. So yeah, they're celebrating their 200th year. Present owners are celebrating their 16th year with it. So it's a phenomenal operation already in place. Our Pine Bluff, Arkansas situation, we are literally raising from the ashes between renovation and funding. We opened last November to a bus conference, which was great, but then we found out we had extensive termite issues and damage.
Oh, no.
So we literally had to shut for almost the whole year and get that addressed. Pine Bluff happens to be 4 hours south of Branson, right on the main corridor of north and south traffic. It's where buses stop for overnights while they're going en route to that.
Oh.
And there's nothing there. So that is one of the things that the light bulb went off, that, okay, market to the bus conference and tour industry. You look across the country, John, there are little small, wonderful theaters that have once been just great theaters. Mm-hmm. They're shut down. They're dilapidated. The roofs are falling in. They're vacant, whatever. It's all across the country. Some of the cities revitalize that area, whether they try to turn it into a historic district or an arts community or whatever, the vibey area. And over the course of 10 years, they transform a downtrodden area into a hip historic district and or whatever.
Yep.
That is what they're trying to do in our 2-block area within Pine Bluff right now. And they also just voted in, we will have a casino coming into Pine Bluff. An Indian casino is going to be built next year. That's going to make a big difference for us too. That's a whole of the show.
That's a whole nother story.
Let me tell you, just dealing with what it's like trying to run a theater, the concept of running a theater, what you deal with running a theater, what you deal with municipal, local, state issues. We're a national historic site, so we're able to get some funding, and we're dealing with grants and dealing with all of that. Dealing with the tour bus industry, the past 2 years of going to conventions and conferences is like going to a college education to learn that part of the business. In the course of the 2 years, we've had a new roof put on, we've had a new parking lot done, we've renovation inside. I mean, we've had extensive amount, and the vast majority is all this from dealing with grants and finding the funds, dealing with it that way. So we hope to start our spring season next spring with the bus tours, spring and fall. And each year is going to grow quite a bit. And of course, once that casino is up and running, this then becomes a 7-day-a-week situation for us.
And by the way, is it a coincidence that you saw Houdini so many years ago in Pine Bluff, and now you have a theater in Pine Bluff?
Well, I did see him in Pine. I mean, I saw the show. Okay. Saw the movie. Okay. Yeah. I didn't see the movie in Pine Bluff, but saw that. Oh, here's a weird thing too. There's an old 30s movie. I think it's called The Mentalist.
Uh-huh.
I think it's The Mentalist. William Warren is the actor. So if you Google William Warren movies or whatever, it's The Mentalist. And when I took my first engagement in Pine Bluff, didn't know anything about Pine Bluff. I watched that movie that night on Turner Classic Movie, and it's about a con man doing a fake psychic show. He's traveling with the circus, and he's traveling with the Tent Road and the Orpheum Circus, and it's showing the railroad thing, because Pine Bluff was a main vaudeville stop in the 20s. Our little community theater across the street, cat a corner, is what is left of a Sanger theater. The Sanger brothers built about 20 of these magnificent show palaces in the South, copied after European opera style buildings. But I've been over to walk on it, and you walk on the same boards that Will Rogers walked on. Wow. I stand on the same trap door that Houdini used. It's sad to see the condition, because I feel that those are like hallowed grounds when you walk on boards like that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that maybe with the casino coming into town and the influx of what changes can come, that there may be something in store for that Sanger in renovation. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too.
That being said, our concentration is directly cat-a-corner to that, and that's our community theater. We're about a 250-seat theater. Our goal is that within 5 years, we're at capacity. We can't grow any farther, and we're hoping maybe at that point there'd be funding that we could move into the Sanger. That's a long way down right now.
So that's your new community theater in Arkansas.
Yes.
Do you have a recommended book or two?
Several, and they're interesting choices. As a kid, my Bible was Illusion Show Know-How. I don't know if it's in print today. Ken and Roberta Griffin, I think it was.
Okay.
It was what touring with a big road show was like through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and the marketing and the PR. You look back of how things were marketed, and it's so interesting, and how that stuff is still applicable today within today's social media. That's one. I have 4, actually.
Go.
And this is what's interesting, okay? One is Steve Martin's Born Standing Up.
I've read it. It's wonderful.
that's one I recommend to anyone, that if you're looking at traveling, being on the road, what a career of what it is. Steve talks about stand-up and everything, but between starting with magic, I can't tell you how much I related to what he was writing in that book, being on the road and what that's like. That's a brilliant one.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones I think are history, because I think there's so much to learn from our past. We can get very caught up in what we're doing on stage. And my opinion is what you're doing on stage is, yes, focus, but you have to project. And I don't care whether you're working in a room for 30 or whether you're working in a room for 3,000 people. You need to know. You've got to be able to adjust and know that. Don't get caught up in that double undercut or the whatever you're doing, this or that. Project. And I think the biggest fault of performers today that are working, they're not entertaining. They're performing. Project, entertain, make that entertaining, and make it yourself. If you need to form a character to project that way, then if you don't have it yourself, then do it that way. The other thing I always tell people when they go on stage is to carry a sense of confidence, to not be insecure. Don't look at what you're not going to be doing. Be confident and be the star that you are. That's one of my favorites. Now, my other books are No Applause, Just Throw Money. And it's it's the book that made vaudeville famous.
I like that title.
Yeah, isn't that great? No applause, just throw money. It's the book that made vaudeville. It's Trav S.D. is the writer. It is a fabulous history of where we all come from, of showbiz and the eras of showbiz. Because I tend to think showbiz works in about 30, 40-year cycles. You know, you go back, you had the Wild West and the circuses. That evolved into the dime store museums and those circuits. That went burlesque and vaudeville. Vaudeville went to nightclub, Broadway, nightclub, Vegas. That went to a cruise. Then there's definitely been a 20 to 30 year period that's the epitome of golden entertainment within the cruise industry, which is changing now. And we're all wondering, what's the next one? The other book I love is The Magician and the Card Sharp. It's The Search for America's Greatest Sleight of Hand Artists. It's by Carl Johnson. Mm-hmm. And it's the story of Di Vernon and Charlie Reynolds in the late 20s and 30s of searching for a card shark, not a magician. Oh. But that was to be able to do something that was just basically impossible, and that's a middle deal. Oh. Not a bottom deal, not a top deal, but a middle deal. And it was thought to be unheard of, and the research where they had to go, that particular time in history, an early background of Vernon, all that, just really, really cool. And last but not least, I think for any magician, this is my throwback. I do a lecture on the ships on Houdini. Mm-hmm. I really love one of the last things. I have everything on Houdini, The Secret Life of Houdini, the making of America's first superhero. I think, and I know some of the subject matter is controversial, but I think how they've been able to cross-index digitally some of this information is really fascinating. And if you don't know about it, it's a fabulous read. So
that's the name of the book, The Secret Life of Houdini?
Yeah, The Secret Life of Houdini, the making of America's first superhero.
Okay. Where can someone get a hold of you if they decide they want to have some questions of their own?
Hey, get hold of me on Facebook. It's Craig Diamond on Facebook. And the Savannah Theater engagement, by the way, is February 21st to March 3rd.
Okay.
If anybody is in the Savannah region, Savannah is an exceptionally cool city. The theater, by the way, is you walk out of the lobby and you're in the park, right at the park bench that Forrest Gump sat on. Oh. To contact me, Facebook, I'll be happy to speak to absolutely anybody. Uh-huh. My website is craigdiamondentertainment.com. Mm-hmm. You can also email me through that.
Perfect. You can reach me at my email at john@thevarietyartist.com and join my Facebook group at The Variety Artist, where you can ask me to ask questions of our guests. And make sure to share this interview with all your friends on your social media. Now go out and book those gigs, make some money, and have some fun.
That's all for this episode of The Variety Artist, but your journey continues on our website. Go to thevarietyartist.com for more strategies, insight, and resources, as well as show notes on today's guest to assist you in your career. We'll see you on the next episode of The Variety Artist. But until then, go out and book those gigs, make some money, and have some fun.